Hi, Misha here. A couple of you have asked about doing more aircraft videos, and since it's the beginning of the month, that does mean I have a couple of new Hobbymaster 172 scale diecast. It's pretty light load this month, but I can make a couple of videos out of these. In the past, still using the old camera, I showed you this model here. This is Lockheed Martin F-22 or F-22A Raptor, circa 2005-2006, so introduction to service time period. I've had this one for a few years. This one over here just came out with Hobbymaster. This is the same model, F-22, F-22A, but it's from September of 1997, which is significant. This is the first production model, or rather really pre-production model, done after the whole testing phase in the 1980s, where it won the competition against the Northrop YF-23. And I just thought it was a neat model. This one over here I've always had kind of displayed clean, nothing under the wings, just because it is a stealth fighter. This one though came with not only drop tanks, but also some AMRAAMs, some AIM-120s, a total of 4 for under the wings. And I thought it would be neat to have one kind of combat loaded out. Typically, this aircraft would not carry under the wings because that does negatively impact stealth, but it can not only carry air-to-air missiles, but drop tanks and even some guided bombs. So yeah, why don't we revisit the Raptor? While it's true the F-22 did not enter into service even initially until late 2005, the idea dated all the way back to the beginning of the 1980s. You had things, for example, Project Senior Sky. You had what would become the F-117, the B-2. Stealth was kind of all the rage at the time, and something the U.S. Air Force was greatly interested in. In 1983, what would eventually become known as the ATF, the Advanced Tactical Fighter Program, started to become kind of organized and grouped together. And in 85, they finally released specifications for what they wanted. And the two main goals were supercruise, meaning able to go supersonic without an afterburner, and a high degree of stealth. It was to be an air superiority fighter, so air-to-air only, to replace the F-15 and some F-16s. And this was kind of in response to new technology coming out of the Soviet Union. Have to remember, in this period, 83, 85, still very much a Cold War going on. And Russia had just released the MiG-29, and would soon have the Sukhoi Su-27 in full production. And maybe even more critically, they had better SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, with better, more intelligent guidance and all that, so stealth was important. Many companies were interested, which is, not gives a lucrative contract, but it was also extremely demanding. Just because those were the two main goals, that doesn't mean that was it. There were tons of requirements here. Actually, so many that they had to kind of loosen things up eventually. But anyway, in 1986, 2 companies were selected, each to make 2 prototypes. That would be Northrop. They would make 2 YF-23s. And Lockheed Martin, which would make 2 YF-22s. And they wanted 2 because they wanted to try 2 different engine types in these. And Northrop would partner with their frenemy, McDonnell Douglas, and Lockheed Martin would partner with Boeing, as well as General Dynamics. And it was a pretty long development cycle, over 2 years. Nevertheless, by 1990, the fly-offs were ready to begin. And so what happened? They were head-to-head. And at this time, the Cold War is still officially on, but as you know, with history, it was changing rapidly. And then, of course, at the beginning of 91, you had the first Gulf War, and soon we would have the fall of the USSR that year. Nevertheless, in April of 1991, literally waiting by the phone, both teams, Northrop and Lockheed Martin, waited to see who would be the winner. The Lockheed design was cheaper, relatively speaking, and a little more maneuverable, a little more agile. However, the Northrop design was faster and stealthier, which is frankly very impressive when we talk about how stealthy this thing is already. Essentially, it was invisible. And in a lot of ways, Northrop thought they had it. They had the more advanced aircraft, they thought. But in the end, cost kind of won out, and Lockheed was chosen in April of 1991. Interestingly, the F-22 prototypes were ordered destroyed because of the technology involved. And from there, Lockheed would work on a advanced design, changing some things like the cockpit layout a bit, the leading edges, the rear stabilizers would change a bit from the prototype, things of that nature. There actually were quite a few changes, which kind of explains why they didn't really start producing the beginning of the production line, or pre-production I should really say, until 1996. In fact, at this point, they still don't really have a contract. They're going to build a handful of pre-production models for airframe testing, ordnance testing, systems testing, and of course, stealth is one thing, but you don't really know until it's, on the screen, or rather, not on the screen. The first pre-production model, the one here, was rolled out in April of 1997. After some ground testing and whatnot, it took its first flight on September 7 of that year. And it would be joined by a second model, both were used for airframe testing. And there would be 5 or 6 more kind of pre-production models. It's a little vague because the final pre-productions really blur into full production models. And so they would continue testing throughout the late 90s. But of course, at this point, there's major budget cuts because Cold War is over. 9/11 has not happened yet. And this is why the numbers really go down as far as how many they want. Before we get into that drama, let's talk about some of the specifications of this aircraft and what it can really do. This was designed with the goal of as close to complete stealth as possible. Now, of course, not necessarily visual, but against radar, infrared, heat sensors, anything they could really think of. And that's all the more impressive considering this is not a small or light aircraft. Originally, it was supposed to be 50,000 pounds. In the end, it had to grow to over 60,000 just to accommodate even the cut-back equipment. It had very advanced avionics, very advanced hardware, radar detection suites, all that good stuff. And of course, everything had to be integrated into the hull because stealth has certain inherent design requirements for the angles and lines. It had a more advanced coating on the hull than like the B-2 or the F-117. It didn't have to be stored in a special hangar. It could be out in the weather. But it was still an expensive and somewhat difficult to maintain system. This aircraft measures just over 62 feet long and right at 44.5 feet on the wingspan. In addition to the angles used, the paint, the canopy was designed to increase stealth. It actually has vectorable nozzles for the 2 engines in the back. They can also have their heat signature reduced. The ducting and everything they do decreases the heat output as much as is practical. It's kind of neat. As I showed you earlier, even on this model, the stabilizers move and can do so independently. Other things it used to keep itself safe: very fast. I told you super cruise was important. Originally, this could get up to Mach 1.5 in testing without afterburner. Later versions could go past Mach 1.8 with that afterburner, at least for short durations before they're out of fuel. And with afterburner, it can exceed Mach 2.2. So maybe not literally the fastest aircraft, it's no SR-71, but it's a lot. I mean, its super cruise is faster than the F-35. Another thing it used was altitude to its advantage. Max ceiling, at least as far as we know, is 65,000 feet, which is high. Most aircraft today are between 50 and 60,000, at least what they admit to. But most aircraft at that altitude have basically no maneuverability, no agility. The F-22 actually can perform at those heights. Can maneuver, can potentially aim, dogfight, get out of the way, do things. So it's actually quite capable. It is pretty well armed for what it is. Learning lessons from Vietnam, it has a 20mm cannon, M61, but unlike the older M61s, this is now the A2 version. And it has a 480 round magazine. Of course, it too is designed and housed in a way for maximum stealth. But of course, its primary weapons are missiles. Originally, this was designed for air-to-air, and it has one large central bay under here. They can house up to 6 missiles, typically AMRAAMs, AIM-120s, or a mix. And then it has a small bay, one on each side, that houses an AIM-9 Sidewinder for close-in, close-range support and defense. So a total of 8 missiles standard, usually those two mixed up for air defense, short and medium range. And especially these little side bays are designed to snap open, launch their missiles and snap closed in just a split second. The larger bay does take a little more time to open and close, but even it's designed to be as quick as possible, because when these are open, stealth is gone. And now the reason I thought this model would be neat is because it has the 4 wing hardpoints, 2 under each wing. Now, a lot of times they're empty. Other times they just have the 2 ferry tanks, the 2 drop tanks here. But they can carry a total of up to 8 AMRAAMs under the wings. 4 hardpoints with a double mount each. And of course this kills a lot of the absolute stealth nature. But one thing they did design was these pylons. After you either use up the fuel in your tank or fire your missiles, they can be ejected to restore some stealth there. Neat idea. It's a very advanced aircraft. Unfortunately, it was designed for the needs of the 1980s and for a communist threat that no longer existed. And at the turn of the millennium, the Russian Federation wasn't exactly perceived as a threat in America. China was a bit of a mindset, but they were still well into 4th, even some 3rd generation jets. So there was a lot of question about what's the purpose of spending all the money here. There's also a question about what to call it early on. Of course, we know it as the Raptor today, but many names were discussed over the years. Maybe most interestingly, Lightning II, which eventually would get applied to the F-35. But Raptor finally kind of emerged in the 90s during the time period that they were setting it for production, and it kind of stuck. And that's the name that I always knew it as, because in the 90s, the ATF, Advanced Tactical Fighter, the Raptor was kind of the new hot thing that was just now coming out and was supposed to be going into production and all this stuff. But by 2000, many of us were wondering if it would ever go past the pre-production phase, or what was going to happen. Did it even have a purpose? Was there even a reason to have this? And then, of course, everything changed in September of 2001. As we enter into the actual service area and the 21st century, let's swap back to my older model here. And let's also go back in time, because the numbers on this are hilarious in a weird way. In 1984-85, the Air Force was hoping to have the new aircraft ready in production by 94, and they were planning on 750 of them. That might seem ludicrous, but keep in mind how many F-16s they had. Well, this didn't last long. In 1990, the way the political situation was going, it wasn't just the Navy that got problems with their F-14. The Air Force did too. A defense review reduced that number to under 650. I think it was like 648. And then in 1994, even before production was underway, it was again reduced to like 442. And then in 1997, just as the first aircraft there was beginning to take flight, this was further reduced to like 339. And it would stay there a little bit of time. In September of 2000, Lockheed Martin was awarded a contract to build these. And they would be the prime contractor, with Boeing being kind of the major secondary contractor. Boeing would make part of the rear fuselage and part of the wing and stuff. But over 1,000 subcontractors were used. And this is actually how it was able to go ahead and get approved for production, because this spread jobs through almost every state. Like 45, 46 states ended up with jobs producing some component of the F-22. So there we go. And the funny thing is, around this time, of course, no one really knew a purpose for it. In fact, it started to be referred to as the FA-22, Fighter Attack. And they thought about giving it more. It always was designed with a little bit of secondary ground attack ability, but they thought about expanding it. It also had a reconnaissance capability, which makes sense for stealth. Although this name FA-22 was never used, they used F-22. But of course, then the War on Terror began. This still didn't keep them from slashing the number again in 2003 down to 277, because this is an air superiority fighter. They didn't need that for the War on Terror. They needed other aircraft, F-16s, A-10s even, what have you. But nevertheless, that year, the first true full production model came off the assembly line, and testing began, and this aircraft reached initial operating capacity at the end of 2005, was declared initially operationally ready. But by this time, the number had been reduced again to 183. Yeah. Well, it is what it is. And they are in production. And this model here is when they went over to England, kind of showing the flag, demonstrating the capabilities. In 2006 and 2007, the F-22 became famous for war games, namely those in Alaska, where it proved very effective. No F-22s were shot down during the simulated warfare, and only a couple of their friendlies were lost. They even practiced bomber escort. And speaking of, in late 2007, the F-22 had its first real intercept of Russian bombers out past Alaska. Again, this is when Putin was starting to flex Russia's muscles. And yeah, the people started to realize maybe Russia's more of a threat than we thought. Maybe we wrote them off too soon. This actually led, in 2008, to Congress approving a slight increase in the production of these, up to 187. But these aircraft are that expensive. Just to have 4 more added back, it took an act of Congress, because we're still talking billions of dollars. And that ended up being the total number produced, 187, at least for the military, not counting pre-production and prototypes and that stuff. I think the total, including everything, is like 195. It's under 200. In the military, they had 149 full combat-ready ones. By the way, this reached full combat capacity in late 2007. And they kept 37 back as trainers, our machines basically to build up your time on them and orientation and proficiency. And one was kept at Edwards for testing. Now, interestingly, they considered making an F-22B, a 2-seat trainer, but they never did. So they just they stick with the single-seater here for training, or they'll use something else like a T-38 to kind of get people initially familiar with a jet. Its first overseas deployment was to Japan in 2007. And actually, they held off sending these to the Middle East until well into 2009, and then they were stationed at the UAE. They would continue to intercept Russian aircraft from time to time. And then in 2013, they would kind of play some cat and mouse games with Iranian F-4 Phantoms. But they would not have their true combat debut until September of 2014, when they dropped ordnance over Syria. And by this time, they had expanded its ground attack capabilities. They're able to carry JDAMs and a few other guided munitions, and were proving to be very accurate, very good targeters there. And they've seen various combat roles since, including escorting B-52s, tangling again with Russian aircraft. Luckily, no live fire. But the U.S. Air Force is the only operator of the F-22 Raptor. Other nations were interested in it. Of course, quite famously, Israel, also Japan, and even Australia considered it. But because of the advanced technology inherent in the design, the American government has repeatedly said, no, we're not exporting these. Certainly not production license, but not even going to sell these to allies, even our closest ones. Instead, you have the F-35, and some aspects of the F-22 did bleed over into the F-35. And ironically, those 3 nations, Australia, Japan, and Israel, all fly the F-35 today after major delays. So like I said, in 2008, they did slightly expand the number allowed, but this would only be a short reprieve for the Raptor. By the summer of 2009, again, spending reviews and kind of utilizations of aircraft, it was decided to officially discontinue to shut down the production line for the F-22. Instead, they would produce more FA-18s, and they were optimistic that the F-35 would be coming around soon, so they were putting their eggs in those baskets. So, of course, the existing contracts were still extant and would continue. Lockheed Martin would finish up the last production aircraft at the end of 2011, and after testing, it would be delivered in May of 2012 to the Air Force, and of course would go into service from there. And that's it. The tooling, the production tooling and everything was carefully crated up, sealed up, and put into deep freeze storage, I guess you could say. I appreciate you hanging out with me and kind of listening to me talk about aircraft. As you know, I'm in no way an expert. That's not my field. I just found them interesting, and I like having models because I can kind of see what these things look like. And for the time I grew up in, this was kind of the pinnacle of American technology, at least fighter technology. And I would argue probably still is. The F-35 and other aircraft are very advanced, but this is probably the most advanced air superiority fighter America has ever have, perhaps ever will have, because it's the last relic of the Cold War, that Cold War that I grew up in. That time is gone. And of course, the Raptor has had updates over the years, even if we only have the original F-22A version. Even before it went into full production in 2001, it had a computer system and software update, which not surprising. It also was updated in 2005, right as it was becoming operationally ready to use the JDAM. It would also have a radar update in the years in service there, about 2007, 2008. In 2011, to kind of give it more use and flexibility, War on Terror and all, its ground attack abilities were further expanded, so it could carry different munitions. It could even carry just dumb iron bombs. And it's kind of gone on from there. The biggest one to note, and this was more for the pilot, was the oxygen system was updated. This had a very advanced life support system, as you can imagine, because of the high altitudes and everything. But there was problems with hypoxia and other issues. Originally, the fix was to give a secondary backup oxygen system that needed to be manually activated. But this still wasn't perfect. In fact, someone lost his life because of this. So, I think it was around 2012, they introduced a automatic backup oxygen system. So if the primary failed, it would kick in. So that was probably a pretty darn important update, I would say. In recent years, other updates have been more computer and software updates. I mean, computers age, of course. And most recently, I believe the radio system, the comms systems were updated, which makes sense considering the times we live in. What's next for this? Well, about 2024, it's planned for a MLU, a midlife upgrade. And I'm sure that'll have many changes yet to be fully determined, although we're getting pretty close now in 2021. And at this time, the Air Force is saying they plan to retire these around 2030. We'll see if that comes to fruition. Considering the youngest ones only came out in 2012, I bet they try to get a little more use out of them than 18 years. But I could be wrong, because some of the older ones, do date back, at that point, 30 years. So we'll see. We will see. You know, when the Air Force put the tooling up, they did do so in a way that production could potentially be started again. I was going to do that. These are very big. And in 2016, the government did order them to kind of conduct a study of what it might cost to start the production lineup at Lockheed Martin again. And in 2017, the report was presented to Congress, to which they immediately said nope. So it was way too much money to restart production of the F-22 for the cost benefits absolutely did not work out. Also, finally, by 2017, the F-35 was finally starting to come online and actually be something that they could use. But they did consider it. Lockheed Martin's suggestion, which is logical, instead of building new airframes, take some of the trainers and just convert them into fully combat-capable craft. I don't think anything has come of this, but I could be wrong. Let me know if you know. But that seems like a good idea. If you want 10 or 15 more, convert them from low air mile trainers. Just a thought from a novice. As for these models from Hobby Master, to wrap things up, like I said in the beginning, they are die-cast. The whole wing, sorry, this one is dusty. It's been on the back of a shelf. The whole wing is metal. The stabilizers are metal, even though they move. Most of the nose is metal, right up to the very tip. Actually, that might be. Yeah, it is metal. Yeah, it's all metal. This is one of the heavier Hobby Masters because there's just such sleek lines on this. They can do everything in metal. Of course, the doors are plastic because you can plug those in for closed like on mine, or you can plug them in open to show ordnance all hanging out and being free. Same for the side bays. This one did come with external fuel tanks, which again I don't use, but it only has the two, one slot on each wing, whereas our new one here has all four. Again, the ordnance is optional. Of course, the canopy opens because it's a Hobby Master. We have a removable pilot figure. We have gear up and down. I think you know the drill. And I do like this stand. It actually has A, the wider base, B, the metal stem instead of plastic, and C, it slots in. And if you don't want it in, there's an alternative plate you can install. It doesn't have the slot at all, so if you want no holes or anything in the bottom, you can do it that way. So I think it's definitely one of their better efforts. I mean, other companies like, say, Air Force One also make F-22s, but to my mind, the Hobby Master is just nicer. It's just a shame there aren't other variants of this aircraft to really pick up on. They did think about doing a navalized version, but never did. Never did. As many programs in that era, it was ended before it really began. It'll be interesting to see. Again, this really is, even today with the ground attack abilities and reconnaissance abilities, which it has been used occasionally for, this is a fighter. It is meant to intercept other fighters, to attack bombers if they approach American airspace, and to escort friendlies while they're doing their job. But, you know, as we saw over Syria, it can deliver precision-guided munitions itself. You know, I'm not really sure how much. I know the internal bays can hold 6 plus the 2 sidewinders, and the wings they can carry up to 5,000 pounds per pylon, but I don't think you can go with all 4 pylons fully loaded up to 20,000. I think you're going to run into a limit, at least in practical terms, of about 15 to 18,000. Again, let me know if I'm wrong there. I don't know, not much going on, so thought I would talk about the Raptor, because I know that when I've done models lately, they have really been the Star Wars stuff, mostly because they're easier to do, and I've been really busy at work. But this one just came in, so let me know what you think of it. I really do like it. I like this new version with the ordnance. I really don't have any complaints about the model. I like the stand it comes with, which is sometimes a complaint of mine about Hobby Master. And I like the optional ordnance. Maybe I'll display this one with the bays open just for differences, but I really like the clean in-flight look for my models. I don't know. Just me, though. Alrighty, folks. I'll let you go. I do greatly appreciate it. Hope you're having a good weekend. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help support the channel, you can go over to the main Mishaco one, where I actually did feature an F-22 in an older video when we looked at the Air Force's new survival rifle. So, yeah, there's that. I'll catch you very soon next time.